When Daniel Harper stepped into his home after 8 long months working overseas, he expected the kind of relief only distance can build, the quiet satisfaction of sacrifice paying off, the warmth of familiar walls, the comfort of knowing the people he loved were safe under the roof he worked so hard to protect. But the moment his hand left the door handle, something inside him shifted in a way he couldn't explain. The kind of feeling that doesn't come with words, only a tightening in the chest, a hesitation in the breath, a sense that the place he had just entered was no longer the same place he had left behind. Because the house was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet that follows a long day, but the kind that feels empty, stretched thin, as if sound itself had been pushed out of the rooms. And then he heard it, faint at first, almost easy to ignore, a soft knock that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And for a second he stood still, convincing himself it was nothing, maybe the pipes, maybe the settling of wood, maybe just the exhaustion of travel playing tricks on him. But then it came again, slower this time, spaced out with intention, deliberate in a way that made his stomach drop. Because this wasn't random, this wasn't noise, this was something trying to be heard, something patient, something waiting. And without realizing it, Daniel found himself walking toward the basement door, a door that looked the same and yet somehow different, a door that now had a lock on it, a lock he knew for a fact had never been there before he left. And as his hand hovered over it, that feeling in his chest grew heavier, louder than the silence around him, louder than reason. And when he finally opened it, when the darkness gave way just enough for him to see what was hidden below, what he found inside didn't just shock him. It didn't just confuse him. It shattered everything he believed about the life he had been working so hard to hold together. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How does a man leave everything he knows behind, cross oceans, work through exhaustion and distance just to secure a better life for the people he loves, and then return to a home that feels unfamiliar, almost unrecognizable, like something important has shifted while he was gone and no one told him? Because that's the question Daniel Harper would soon be forced to confront as the weight of what he had just seen began to settle into something real, something undeniable, something that could not be explained away by stress or misunderstanding. Because the truth standing in front of him demanded answers he wasn't prepared to face. And as he tried to make sense of it, another question pressed even harder against his thoughts, one that felt impossible to accept, one that no son ever expects to ask. Why was his own mother locked in the basement of his home, in the very place he believed was the safest space he could give her? And as disturbing as that question was, it wasn't the one that would haunt him the most, because there was something even heavier, something that crept in slowly as he looked closer, as he began to notice the details, the condition she was in, the silence she carried with her, the way time seemed to have passed differently for her than it had for him. And that question, the one he couldn't escape, the one that made everything feel worse with every passing second, was how long had she been down there? How many days had turned into nights without anyone knowing? How many moments had passed while he was away, believing everything was fine? And yet what Daniel didn't understand yet, what hadn't fully revealed itself in that moment, was that the truth behind all of this wasn't simple. It wasn't something that could be explained in a single sentence or justified with a single reason. It was deeper than that, layered in a way that would force him to question not just what had happened in his home, but who he had been trusting all along. And as the pieces slowly began to come together, it became clear that the reality waiting for him was far worse than anything he could have imagined when he first walked through that door. Daniel Harper wasn't the kind of man who ran from responsibility. He ran toward it. The kind of man who measured his worth not by what he said, but by what he provided. The kind who believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed disciplined enough, and sacrificed long enough, you could build a life that protected the people you loved from everything the world might throw at them. And that belief had shaped every decision he made, especially the one that took him thousands of miles away from home for 8 long months, working as a structural engineer on a demanding overseas project, waking up before sunrise, pushing through long hours, all with one purpose in mind: to secure a future that felt stable, predictable, and safe for his family. Because to Daniel, providing wasn't just about money, it was about peace of mind. It was about making sure his wife never had to worry and his mother never had to struggle again. And that sense of duty had been with him for as long as he could. Remember, rooted deeply in the life he was raised in. A life shaped almost entirely by one person, his mother, Estelle Harper. The woman who carried him through years of hardship without ever letting him feel the full weight of it. The woman who worked tirelessly, who sacrificed quietly, who stood as both parent and protector when his father walked away, leaving behind more questions than answers. And from that absence, Daniel learned early what it meant to stay, what it meant to commit, what it meant to carry responsibility even when it felt heavy. And Estelle became more than just his mother. She became his moral center, the voice in his head that reminded him who he was supposed to be, the standard he measured himself against. And their bond was not something that faded with time. It only grew stronger, especially as Daniel got older and began building a life of his own. Because even after he married, even after he moved into his own home, even after he stepped into his role as a husband, that connection remained steady, unshaken, a quiet understanding between them that no matter how life changed, they would always look out for each other. And when Daniel met Portia, everything at first felt like it was falling into place exactly the way it was supposed to. She was warm, attentive, supportive in ways that made the future feel certain. She understood his ambition, respected his work, and embraced the life he was trying to build. And in those early days, there was nothing that suggested what would eventually come. Because Portia presented herself as someone who valued family, someone who cared deeply, someone who could be trusted to hold things together while Daniel handled the responsibilities that took him away from home. And when the opportunity came for him to take that overseas contract, it was Portia who encouraged him to go, reassuring him that everything would be fine, that she would take care of the house, that she would check on Estelle, that he didn't need to worry about anything back home. And those words mattered, because for Daniel, leaving wasn't easy. It never was. Every mile of distance came with a quiet concern, a lingering question about what he might be missing. But Portia made it easier. She gave him the confidence to focus on his work, to believe that the foundation of his home was secure. And for a while, it seemed like it was. Their calls were regular, their conversations normal, nothing out of place, nothing that raised concern, at least not at first. But over time, small things began to shift in ways that were easy to overlook in the moment, things that didn't seem significant, enough to question, but were just enough to register somewhere in the back of his mind. Subtle changes in tone, brief pauses in conversation, moments where Portia seemed distracted or distant, especially when it came to anything involving his mother, because whenever Daniel asked about Estelle, the answers were always the same. She's resting, she's tired, she's not feeling up to talking right now. And at first, that explanation made sense. After all, Estelle wasn't young anymore. She had her health concerns, her quieter days, and Daniel trusted that what he was being told was true, because trust was the foundation of everything he believed in. Trust in the people he loved, trust in the life he had built, and trust in the idea that if something was wrong, he would know. But there were moments, brief and easy to dismiss, where that trust felt just slightly out of alignment, like a detail that didn't quite fit, but wasn't obvious enough to question directly. Times when he would ask to speak with his mother, and the conversation would quickly shift. Times when Portia's responses felt rehearsed rather than natural. Times when the connection between what was being said and what he expected to hear didn't quite match. And yet, each time, he pushed those thoughts aside, convincing himself that distance had a way of distorting perception, that long days and time zones could play tricks on clarity, that there was no reason to doubt what he had no real evidence to question. And so he focused on his work, on finishing the contract, on returning home to everything he believed was still intact, unaware that those small, almost invisible moments were not random. They were not meaningless. They were signs, quiet ones, but signs nonetheless, pointing towards something he wasn't ready to see. Looking back, those signs would take on a different weight, a different meaning, because what once felt like minor inconsistencies would reveal themselves as something far more important, something that had been building slowly over time, hidden beneath normal conversations and everyday routines. And the truth was, nothing had changed suddenly. Nothing had shifted overnight. It had all happened gradually, in small steps, in quiet moments, in decisions made without him there to question them. And by the time Daniel walked back into that house, by the time he heard that first knock beneath the floor, by the time he reached for that basement door, everything that had been set in motion was already far beyond the point of being undone. And the realization that followed would be one he couldn't escape, because the signs had always been there, right in front of him, woven into the conversations, hidden in the details, present in ways he chose not to see. And the hardest part wasn't just what had happened. It was understanding that he had trusted completely, without hesitation, without doubt, and that trust had allowed something he never imagined to unfold right inside his own home. Daniel's return home didn't feel like the end of a long journey. It felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand, because from the moment he stepped inside that night, there was no sense of welcome waiting for him, no familiar warmth, no small signs that someone had been anticipating his arrival. Instead, there was only stillness, the kind that settles in spaces that haven't been touched by comfort in a while. And even before he set his bags down, he noticed it. The air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the house itself had been holding on to something it couldn't release. And when he called out Portia's name, his voice seemed to disappear into the walls without an answer. No footsteps, no response, just silence stretching longer than it should have. And that was the first moment where something inside him began to tighten, not enough to form a clear thought, but enough to make him pause, to listen more carefully, to take in the details he might have otherwise ignored, because this wasn't how home was supposed to feel, not after months away, not after everything he had done to get back here. And as he stood there, trying to shake off the unease, trying to convince himself that maybe she had stepped out or simply hadn't heard him, that's when it happened. A faint sound, so quiet it almost blended into the background, a soft knock that seemed to come from somewhere beneath him. And for a moment he froze, unsure if he had actually heard anything at all, because it was subtle, barely there, easy to dismiss as the normal settling of a house. But something about it didn't sit right. Something about the rhythm felt too precise, too measured. And as he listened, holding his breath without realizing it, the silence returned, stretching out just long enough for doubt to settle in, for him to question his own senses. But then it came again, clearer this time, slower, spaced out in a way that removed any uncertainty. And that's when the realization began to take shape, because this wasn't random, this wasn't noise, this was intentional. Someone was trying to be heard, and the direction it came from left little room for interpretation. It was coming from below, from the basement, a place that had always been nothing more than storage, a space he rarely thought about, a space that had never carried any significance until this moment. And without fully thinking it through, Daniel found himself moving toward the door, each step guided more by instinct than logic, his focus narrowing as that uneasy feeling grew stronger, because something about this didn't belong, something about this wasn't right. And when he reached the door, that feeling became something more defined, something impossible to ignore, because there, attached to the handle, was a lock, a solid, unmistakable lock that had no reason to be there. And for a second, he just stared at it, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were telling him, because he knew this door, he knew every part of this house, and he knew that before he left, this door had never been locked, not like this, not from the outside. And as that realization settled in, he heard movement behind him, the sound of footsteps approaching quickly, almost urgently. And when he turned, Portia was there, her expression shifting the moment she saw where he was standing, her eyes moving from him to the door and back again. And in that brief exchange, before a single word was spoken, something passed between them, something unspoken but clear enough to feel. And when Daniel asked the question that now sat heavily in his mind, "Why is this locked?" the response didn't come immediately. There was a pause, a hesitation that felt out of place. And when she finally spoke, her answer didn't match the situation. It didn't explain the lock. It didn't explain the sound. It only added another layer of confusion that made everything feel even more off. And that hesitation, that lack of clarity, was enough. Enough for Daniel to turn back to the door, enough for him to reach for the lock despite the tension building behind him. Enough for him to decide that whatever was on the other side of that door needed to be seen, needed to be understood. And as the lock gave way and the door slowly opened, the darkness beyond it felt deeper than it should have, swallowing the light in a way that made the space seem unfamiliar. And for a moment, he stood at the top of the stairs, listening, waiting, until a sound rose from below, not a knock this time, but something softer, weaker, a voice that carried just enough strength to be recognized. And when he heard it, when he understood what it was saying, everything inside him came to a stop, because the voice called his name, Darius, in a way only one person ever had. And in that moment, his world stopped, because nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see. And as he moved down those stairs, each step bringing him closer to a truth he couldn't yet accept, the shape in the darkness slowly became clear, a figure sitting where no one should have been, a figure that should have been upstairs, safe, cared for, living normally. And when the light finally reached her face, there was no doubt left. It was his mother, Estelle, alive but changed in ways that spoke of time passing under conditions no one should endure, her appearance telling a story before she even said a word, her presence alone enough to break something inside him that he didn't know could break, and the shock of seeing her there, in that place, in that state, collided with everything he believed about his home, his marriage, his life, creating a moment that didn't feel real, that didn't feel possible, and yet it was happening, right in front of him, undeniable and irreversible. And as he tried to process it, as questions flooded his mind faster than he could form them, there was one thing he needed more than anything else: an explanation, a reason, something that could make sense of what he was seeing. But as his mother looked at him, as she gathered just enough strength to speak, the words she was about to say carried a weight he wasn't ready for, because what his mother said next didn't bring clarity, it didn't offer relief. It made everything even worse. What followed in those next moments didn't feel like a conversation. It felt like something unraveling in real time. Because as Daniel helped his mother up from where she had been sitting, as he tried to understand how any of this could have happened, the weight of what he was seeing began to collide with the reality of who was standing just a few feet behind him. And when he turned back toward Portia, looking for something that made sense, something that could explain even a fraction of what was unfolding, what he found instead was resistance. Not panic, not guilt, but a calm that didn't match the situation, a composure that felt out of place. And when he asked the question that now demanded an answer, "What is going on here?" her response didn't come with urgency. It came with deflection. She said his mother had chosen to stay down there, that she needed space, that she had been difficult, that things had become tense while he was away. And as those words left her mouth, they didn't settle into understanding. They created more distance, more confusion, because nothing about what he was seeing matched the explanation he was being given. And when he pushed further, when he refused to accept what didn't make sense, the tone shifted. The calm gave way to something more defensive, more controlled, as if the narrative she was presenting had already been decided long before this moment. And it became clear that whatever truth existed here wasn't going to be offered freely. As Daniel turned back to his mother, helping her sit, trying to steady both her and himself, what she began to share painted a completely different picture, one that replaced uncertainty with something far more difficult to process. Because this wasn't about choice. This wasn't about needing space. This was about being placed there, kept there, days blending into nights without any real sense of time, meals reduced to just enough to get by, conversations replaced with silence and the isolation that followed was not accidental. It was consistent. It was controlled. It was something that had been maintained over a period that was far longer than Daniel wanted to believe. And as he listened, as each detail added another layer to what had already become unbearable, the realization settled in with a clarity that couldn't be ignored. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. And that word carried a weight that changed everything. Because intention means decision. It means awareness. It means this wasn't something that happened in a moment of confusion. It was something that was allowed to continue, something that was reinforced over time. And the question that followed was one that didn't have an easy answer. Why would someone do this? Why would Portia, someone he trusted completely, someone he believed shared the same values, take actions that led to something like this? And as his mind tried to find a reason, it moved through possibilities that felt equally unsettling. Was it resentment that had grown quietly over time? Was it a need for control that had gone unchecked? Was it something tied to finances, to independence, to removing a presence that challenged her authority in the home? Or was it something more personal, something rooted in a tension that had existed long before he left, but had never been fully addressed. And yet, even as these questions began to form, even as pieces started to align in ways that made the situation clearer, there were still gaps, still parts of the story that didn't fully connect. Because for every explanation that seemed possible, there was something that didn't quite fit. Moments that suggested there had been conflict between Portia and Estelle before. Small disagreements that had never escalated beyond normal family tension. Conversations that had ended without resolution, but without anything that hinted at this level of outcome. And it raised another set of questions that Daniel couldn't ignore. Had his mother been more difficult than he realized? Had there been arguments that were never shared with him? Had something happened in his absence that pushed things further than they had ever gone before? And even as those thoughts surfaced, they didn't sit comfortably, because nothing justified what he was seeing. Nothing explained the condition his mother was in. Nothing aligned with the idea that this had been anything other than a deliberate act carried out over time. And yet, despite everything that was now visible, despite everything that had been said, there was still a sense that something was missing, a detail that hadn't yet come to light, a piece of the story that could shift everything once it was revealed. Because the more Daniel looked at the situation, the more he understood that what he was seeing was only part of the truth, and somewhere, within everything that had happened, there was still one piece of the story missing, something that would explain not just what had been done, but why it had been allowed to continue for as long as it had. The missing piece didn't come all at once. It revealed itself in fragments, in details that only began to make sense when Daniel stepped back from the shock and started looking at the pattern rather than the moment. Because what had happened in that house wasn't sudden. It wasn't the result of one argument or one bad decision. It was something that had been building over time, something that had taken shape quietly while he was gone. And as the truth began to settle into place, it became clear that Portia hadn't simply reacted to a situation. She had been shaping it, guiding it in a direction that slowly removed his mother from the center of their home and placed herself firmly in control of everything around it. Because long before the basement door was ever locked, there had been smaller shifts, subtle changes in how decisions were made, how conversations were handled, how boundaries were set. And at the center of all of it was a growing tension that Daniel had underestimated. A tension between two people who both held influence in his life. One built on years of sacrifice and trust, the other built on partnership and shared future. And somewhere in that space, Portia began to see his mother not as family, but as an obstacle, a presence that challenged her authority, that questioned her choices, that held a level of influence she couldn't fully control. And instead of confronting that tension directly, instead of finding a way to balance it, she began to reshape it. Step by step, creating distance, limiting interaction, controlling communication, until what started as separation slowly became isolation, and isolation, when left unchecked, became something far more damaging, something that crossed a line from disagreement into harm. It didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly, in ways that were easy to justify at first. Small decisions that seemed reasonable in isolation, moments that could be explained away as managing conflict, as maintaining peace. But as those decisions continued, as they stacked on top of each other, the line between control and care began to blur, and eventually, it disappeared entirely, replaced by a version of reality where one person held all the power and the other was left with none. And by the time Daniel's mother was moved into the basement, by the time the door was locked, by the time the routine of limited food, limited contact, and complete isolation was established, it was no longer something that could be undone with a single realization. It had already become part of the structure of that home, something that existed in the background while life on the surface continued as if nothing had changed. And what made it even more difficult to accept was the fact that this wasn't hidden as completely as it should have been. There were moments when the outside world came close to seeing it, times when neighbors heard sounds that didn't quite make sense, faint noises at unusual hours, things that raised questions but never enough to prompt action. And when those concerns reached Portia, when they were brought to her attention, she had answers ready, explanations that were simple enough to be accepted, dismissals that made the situation seem less serious than it was, and because there was no clear evidence, no visible reason to push further, those moments passed without intervention, leaving everything exactly as it was. And as Daniel stood there, facing the full weight of what had been happening in his own home. The realization that settled in was not just about the actions themselves. It was about the awareness behind them. Because this wasn't something done in confusion. This wasn't something misunderstood. This was something known, something maintained, something that continued even when there were opportunities to stop, even when there were moments where the truth could have come out. And that understanding carried a different kind of impact, one that went beyond shock and into something more personal, because it meant that every step along the way had been a choice. Every day it continued had been allowed. And as that truth became impossible to ignore, it led to a conclusion that was as simple as it was devastating. She knew, and she still chose to ignore it. The final moments of what had unfolded inside that house didn't come with relief. They came with a quiet kind of clarity that only appears after everything has already fallen apart. Because once the truth was fully understood, once there was no longer anything left to question or reinterpret, action followed quickly, not out of anger, but out of necessity. And as the situation moved beyond the walls of that home and into the hands of people who could no longer ignore what had happened, Portia's control over the narrative came to an end. The explanations she had relied on no longer held. The version of reality she had maintained could not withstand what was now visible, and the consequences that followed were not sudden. They were the result of everything that had been building over time, everything that had been allowed to continue without interruption. And as authorities became involved, as statements were taken and details were confirmed, the situation shifted from something hidden to something exposed. And in that exposure, there was no room left for denial, no space left for interpretation, only the weight of what had been done and the impact it had left behind. For Daniel, the focus moved immediately to his mother, to getting her out of that space, to making sure she was safe, cared for, and surrounded by the kind of attention she should have had all along. Because whatever questions remained, whatever emotions he still needed to process, none of it mattered more than that. And as Estelle was finally removed from the place she had been kept in for far too long, the reality of what she had endured became clearer, not just in her physical condition, but in the quiet way she carried herself, in the time it would take for her to feel normal again, if that was even possible. And for Daniel, that realization stayed with him, not just as something that had happened, but as something that had changed him, something that reshaped the way he understood trust, responsibility, and the people closest to him. Because the life he thought he had built, the one he had worked so hard to protect, no longer existed in the way he believed it did, and the relationship he once relied on, the partnership he trusted without hesitation, had been broken in a way that couldn't be repaired, not after everything that had come to light, not after everything that had been allowed to happen in his absence. In the end, the truth didn't just break a marriage. It revealed how far someone can go when control replaces compassion, when quiet decisions are made without accountability, when trust is assumed but never questioned. And as everything settled into what would become the new reality, the questions that remained were no longer about what had happened, but about what could have been seen earlier, what could have been understood before it reached this point. Because if you were in Daniel's position, if you were the one who left believing everything was secure, only to return to something you never imagined, would you have seen the signs sooner, or would you have trusted the person closest to you until there was nothing left to question?